So I want you to just imagine unrolling this beautifully preserved, hand-drawn map of the world, like a real 17th century map.
Oh, right, with the heavy parchment and that really dark, faded ink.
Exactly, and your eyes are kind of standing across the Atlantic. You go over to the Americas and you look over to the western edge of the map.
Where California should be.
Right. But instead of seeing that familiar, solid coastline of North America attached to the mainland, you see this massive, colossal island floating completely alone in the Pacific Ocean.
Just entirely detached.
Completely detached. And that island is California. Now, mainstream historians look at that and they just call it, well, basically a 100-year-long cartographer's typo.
Yeah, a massive geographical mistake.
But there is this really massive, highly viral internet subculture that looks at that exact same map and says, no, that wasn't a mistake. That was a cover-up.
I mean, it really is a profound shift in perspective when you think about it.
It really is.
We are just so conditioned to accept the absolute certainty of modern geography.
Yeah.
Like, you look at a map on your phone today, and it's this perfect grid of fixed, satellite-verified coordinates.
Right. It feels binary. Land is either attached or it's not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you start delving into these historical anomalies, that certainty really starts to, fray at the edges.
And pulling on those frayed edges is exactly what we're doing today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
If you are someone who loves exploring multiple perspectives or, questioning the baseline narrative and just experiencing those genuine aha moments, you are going to absolutely love this thought experiment.
It is definitely a rabbit hole.
Oh, a massive one. Today we are exploring the source notes behind a sweeping alternative history theory known as the Lost World of Tartaria.
Right.
And specifically, we're going to look at how this theory just completely reimagines the history, the geography, and the architecture of California.
Before we even look at California, though, I feel like we really need to establish a baseline for you, the listener.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because understanding California's role in this requires, understanding the global scope of this whole Tartarian claim.
Let's definitely lay that groundwork because, in traditional history, Tartaria was really just kind of a geographic catch-all term.
Right, like a placeholder.
Exactly. It was a label European map makers basically just slapped onto the vast, unexplored expanses of northern Asia.
Stretching from, the Caspian Sea all the way over to the Pacific.
Yeah, it wasn't a single nation at all. It was just a giant, we don't know what's out here kind of placeholder on the map.
That is the mainstream consensus, yes. But the alternative internet theory reimagines Tartaria entirely.
Right.
In this narrative, Tartaria wasn't just a blank space. It was a highly advanced, incredibly peaceful global empire.
And we're talking high tech, right?
Oh, absolutely. The theory claims this civilization possessed free energy, master-level engineering, and this unified architectural style that spanned the entire globe. And most importantly for our deep dive today, the theory posits that this entire global empire was deliberately and violently destroyed.
Deliberately destroyed.
Yeah, and then subsequently erased from our history books by this parasitic group of global controllers.
Okay, so we are keeping that in mind. We are talking about a suppressed, utopian, high-tech global civilization.
Exactly.
So with that lens firmly in place, let's bring it back to that 17th century map of the floating island.
Right, back to California.
Yeah. How does California fit into this erased empire?
Well, to understand the Tartaria theory's version of California, we actually have to look at the very origin of the name itself.
The name California?
Yeah. The fact that early European explorers viewed California as this disconnected mythical place is treated by the theory not as ignorance, but as a literal clue.
And I have to say, the origin story of the name California is fascinating all on its own, completely separate from any conspiracy stuff.
Oh,
Because, according to the historical sources provided, the name doesn't actually come from an indigenous word, or some famous explorer, or a monarch. It actually comes from a 16th century Spanish romance novel.
which is just wild to think about.
It is. The novel is called Las Sergas de Esplandian. And in this work of fiction, California was described as an island located very, very close to the earthly paradise.
And it was ruled by a woman named Queen Calafia.
Yes, Queen Calafia.
The texts describe her island as being inhabited entirely by Black Amazonian warrior women.
Mhm.
Like, there were absolutely no men permitted on the island whatsoever.
And the specific details of this island, I mean, they sound like something straight out of a high fantasy video game.
They really do.
Everything on this island, the armor these women wore, the weapons they fought with, even the harnesses for their wild beasts, it was all made entirely out of solid gold.
Just solid gold everywhere.
Yeah, there were literally no other metals on the island. And to protect all of this unimaginable wealth, the island was supposedly guarded by literal griffins.
Like the mythical creatures.
Exactly. Creatures with the head and wings of an eagle and the body of a lion.
I mean, it sounds like pure fantasy to our modern ears, obviously. Right. But you have to really put yourself in the mindset of a 16th century Spanish explorer.
That's a great point.
They were actively searching for El Dorado, right?
Yeah.
They were actually discovering massive, unprecedented wealth in the Americas.
So the idea of an island of gold wasn't that crazy to them.
Exactly. To them, the line between myth and reality was incredibly thin. So California, in their cultural consciousness, wasn't just a physical plot of dirt.
It was more than that.
It was synonymous with this almost otherworldly kingdom of limitless wealth.
But, believing a myth is one thing. Officially charting it on a map is another thing entirely.
That is where it gets really interesting.
Because for over a century, throughout the 1600s and 1700s, we have hundreds of actual official maps that consistently depicted California as a massive island.
Hundreds of them.
Hundreds. They drew this massive geographical rift, extending all the way down into Mexico, separating it completely from the North American continent.
Now, the standard historical explanation for this relies heavily on human error and just poor surveying.
Like they just messed up the drawing.
Basically, yeah. The idea is that early explorers navigated the Gulf of California, hit some complex tidal zones, or misjudged the Baja Peninsula, and just assumed the water kept going.
Right.
And then cartographers back in Europe just blindly copied that original error for, 100 years.
See, I have to push back on that explanation just using the logic of this Tartarian thought experiment.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because we aren't just talking about one guy spilling ink on a map and saying, oops.
Right.
We're talking about hundreds of maps spanning multiple generations of cartographers, explorers, and entire naval fleets.
That's a lot of repeated mistakes, for sure.
Exactly. Think about looking at a modern map today and seeing Florida floating hundreds of miles out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
That would be pretty hard to miss.
And then seeing that identical typo reproduced by every major university and government for the next 100 years?
Yeah, that stretches credibility.
At what point does a massive geographical anomaly like that stop being a simple typo and start being a recorded memory of a world that actually existed?
Well, that is the exact friction point the theory leans into.
Right.
Within the Tartaria narrative, these mapmakers were absolutely not incompetent. They were highly skilled professionals who were recording the world exactly as it was.
Before something changed.
Exactly. Before a cataclysmic geographic and societal shift. The theory suggests California was literally cut off.
Geographically severed.
Geographically severed, yes, but also severed from the timeline of human history that we are allowed to access today.
But hold on, I'm trying to wrap my head around this because that creates a massive logical black hole in the timeline for me.
How so?
Well, the sources say these maps of the floating island are from the 1600s and 1700s, right? But then later in the notes, the theory claims the massive event that actually buried this whole Tartarian empire, the Great Mud Flood, happened in 1862.
All right.
So how does a disaster in 1862 explain why California was floating in the ocean 200 years earlier?
Yeah, you've hit on the most complex and honestly, arguably the most convoluted aspect of this whole theory.
The timeline just doesn't add up.
Right, because it involves the manipulation of time itself.
Right, what?
Yeah. To reconcile that timeline gap, the Tartaria theory argues that the dates we use are entirely fabricated.
You mean the calendar is wrong?
Completely.
Yeah.
The year 1862 was just the final visible reset. The theory claims that the actual chronological timeline of human history was artificially stretched, altered, and manufactured.
Manufactured by who?
By the very people who took over after the empire fell.
Right, so you're telling me they didn't just rewrite the history books, they essentially hacked the calendar itself.
Precisely, they hacked time. And the theory points a very specific finger at a historical figure named Joseph Justus Scaliger.
Okay, who is that?
Well, in real mainstream academia, Scaliger was this 16th century French scholar and Jesuit priest.
Okay.
And he is widely considered to be one of the founders of modern chronology.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he literally did the math to synchronize all these various ancient calendars, like the Greek, Roman, and Persian calendars, into a single, unified historical timeline.
I see exactly where this is going.
Right.
If you are looking for a mastermind who had the power to mess with the timeline, the guy who literally wrote the timeline is your perfect suspect.
Exactly. The theory frames Scaliger not as a brilliant historian, but as the ultimate revisionist, like a chronological engineer.
A chronological engineer, I like that term.
By manipulating dates, adding phantom centuries to the calendar, and shifting events around, the theory argues his group created a false sense of linear progression.
Which would completely obscure when the true cataclysms actually happen.
Exactly. It hides the resets.
I mean, that is a staggering level of deception.
It really is.
But even if you accept that that history and time were totally fabricated, you are still left with a massive physical problem here.
The physical footprint.
Right, you can't just hide an entire advanced global civilization in a closet.
No, you can't.
The buildings, the infrastructure, the physical footprint of Tartaria, it would still be sitting right there. You have to physically bury it somehow.
And that brings us to the supposed mechanism of this massive cover-up, which is known as the Great Mud Flood.
The Great Mud Flood.
Yes. The year 1862 is the real focal point for this event in the theory. And they say it wasn't just a bad storm season.
Okay, so what was it?
Believers posit that the mud flood was a deliberate, catastrophic mechanism designed to literally sweep the old civilization under a rug of dirt.
Like a geological reset button.
Exactly. We are talking about oceans of mud flowing across the land, burying the original ground level of the earth by several feet.
Several feet of mud everywhere.
Everywhere. Sometimes entombing entire first and second stories of these massive buildings.
But how do they explain the physics of that? I mean, you don't just spawn millions of tons of mud out of thin air. Do they think it was some kind of meteorological weapon?
Well, the mechanics kind of vary depending on which corner of the internet you are in.
Sure.
Some suggest deliberate soil liquefaction.
Soil liquefaction. What does that mean in this context?
Essentially, using frequency or energy weapons to turn solid Earth into a liquid state, which would cause the heavy Tartarian structures to just sink straight into the ground.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And others suggest the destruction of this massive atmospheric water canopy that just dumped unimaginable amounts of water and sediment onto the surface all at once.
So it was basically a weaponized flood.
Right. The constant across all these theories, however, is that it was absolutely not a natural act of God. It was a targeted demolition.
And the physical evidence for this targeted demolition is something you can supposedly see in almost every major city right now, which is wild to think about.
Yeah, you just have to look at the buildings.
Right. Think about the oldest buildings in your own downtown area. Have you ever noticed those strange tiny windows sitting perfectly level with the sidewalk?
Yeah, where they're just barely peeking over the concrete.
Exactly. Architecture calls them half basements. You look at the building, and the lowest windows are cut off halfway by the street level.
Right.
Or maybe you have to walk up this really steep, awkward flight of exterior stairs just to reach the front door on what is supposedly the ground floor.
Now, mainstream architectural history obviously offers very practical explanations for these features.
Right, like what?
Well, that they were designed for natural ventilation, or letting light into root cellars, or serving as coal delivery chutes during the Industrial Revolution.
Just a matter of utility.
Exactly, just purely functional design.
But the Tartarian perspective flips that completely upside down. They ask you to look at those ankle-level windows and see a tragedy.
A literal cover-up.
Right. They argue those aren't basements at all. Those were the original grand first floors with tall, beautiful windows, and they were swallowed completely by the mud flood.
And the new street level was just paved right over the hardened mud.
Exactly. It's a really compelling visual argument, honestly.
It is. It takes something totally mundane and turns it into evidence of this grand conspiracy.
I have to step in with a heavy dose of reality here, though. Logistically, let's just think about the human element for a second.
The survivors.
Right. Are we seriously supposed to believe that an entire civilization was universally swallowed by 10 feet of mud and the surviving human beings just shrugged it off?
Just went about their day.
Yeah, like they just decided to use their second-story windows as their new front doors, built a little wooden staircase up to it, and made a collective pact to never, ever tell their grandchildren that their living rooms were buried underground.
I mean, when you put it like that.
The idea that humanity would just accept a global mud burial and wipe their own memories is incredibly difficult to swallow.
And that is the primary logical hurdle that skeptics consistently point to. It requires an impossibly flawless global conspiracy of silence.
Right.
But to understand why this theory goes so viral, you really have to look past the logistics and look at the psychology of it.
Okay, unpack that for me.
The tragedy of the mud flood, within the lore of the theory, isn't just about property damage. It is the core concept of forced inaccessibility.
Forced inaccessibility, meaning the old world isn't gone, it's just out of reach.
Exactly. Think about how melancholic and almost romantic that idea is.
Yeah.
The magnificent, peaceful old world wasn't blasted into outer space. It wasn't burned to ash. It is directly beneath our feet.
We're just walking on it.
Right. We walk on top of our own true history every single day, separated from it by just a few feet of packed dirt.
That does tap into a very deep, very modern feeling, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
This feeling of being totally disconnected from our past, a feeling like humanity used to be somehow greater or more unified than we are now.
It provides a really tangible reason for that feeling of alienation.
Yeah, it does. And more importantly, from a narrative perspective, burying the old world sets the stage perfectly for a new group of people to step in.
To claim the raised earth.
Exactly. Because once the mud finally settled, somebody had to clean it up.
Which introduces the architects of our modern reality.
Right.
Who actually benefits from a buried world. The theory points squarely at groups like the Jesuits, led by our chronological hacker Scaliger, and the Freemasons.
The classic architects of almost every historical conspiracy ever.
Pretty much, yeah.
But here's the really wild twist that the source material highlights. The theory claims these groups didn't actually lay the bricks of the new world.
Oh, no.
They didn't design the grand Romanesque courtyards or the towering Gothic cathedrals.
No, they absolutely did not build them. The theory argues they simply dug them out of the mud.
They just dug them out.
Yeah, they excavated these magnificent, pre-existing Tartarian structures, washed the dirt off the stone columns, did some basic patchwork, and then confidently slapped a "we built this" label right on the front door.
I mean, it is the greatest case of stolen valor in human history.
Literally.
They are basically walking into an abandoned, fully furnished luxury mansion, changing the locks and telling everyone they built it by hand.
And the ultimate proof the theory offers for this massive architectural heist brings us right back to California.
Ah, yes.
Specifically to San Francisco during the 1849 gold rush.
Because San Francisco is where the official architectural timeline is really put under a microscope by believers.
Exactly. Because when you look closely at the numbers and the actual logistics of that specific era, the mainstream narrative begins to look highly improbable.
Improbable is putting it mildly. Let's just break down the reality of 1849 for a second.
Okay, let's look at the numbers.
According to the sources, San Francisco had a population of barely 800 people.
800 people, that's nothing.
It's a tiny village. We are talking about rugged prospectors panning for gold in freezing rivers, sleeping in canvas tents, eating beans out of tins, and regularly dying of dysentery.
It is a very remote, very grueling outpost.
Extremely. Yet, somehow, seemingly overnight in the years that followed, this muddy little encampment featured massive, intricately carved stone buildings.
Just popping up out of nowhere.
Yeah, gigantic Masonic temples that look like they belonged in the heart of ancient Rome.
And the theory doesn't just focus on the stone blocks either. It heavily scrutinizes structures like the Sutro baths.
So the Sutro baths, yes.
Which is an absolutely colossal anomaly for the time period.
The Sutro baths are definitely the smoking gun for this theory.
Totally.
We are talking about a massive luxury indoor pool complex built right on the edge of the ocean, made almost entirely out of massive panes of glass and tons of steel.
Capable of holding 25,000 people at once.
It's just, let's really think about the HOW here. Making massive sheets of architectural glass in the 1850s requires immense specialized furnaces and incredibly delicate transportation.
And smelting the steel requires massive industrial foundries.
Right. And keep in mind the geographical isolation of California at that time.
Yeah, the Transcontinental Railroad wasn't even finished until 1869.
Exactly. Cross-country roads didn't exist. You couldn't just truck this stuff in.
Yo.
Any heavy machinery or building materials had to be shipped on a boat all the way down around the treacherous tip of South America and back up the coast.
Which took months.
So we are supposed to believe that a few hundred miners took a weekend off from panning for gold to forge thousands of tons of steel.
Manufacture acres of glass.
Right, transport it flawlessly and construct a 25,000-person luxury water park. The logistics of the labor force alone are completely absurd.
And that logistical absurdity is the main engine of the Tartaria theory.
It makes sense why they focus on it.
When you look at the sheer impossibility of that construction timeline, San Francisco stops looking like a boomtown and starts looking like what the theory calls a portal city.
A portal city. So essentially, they are treating San Francisco like a giant mud-covered time capsule.
Exactly. The settlers didn't build it. They just unlocked the door and walked into a ready-made metropolis.
That is the core argument, right? The 49ers arrived, found this magnificent, partially buried Tartarian jewel, cleared the mud out of the grand halls, and repurposed it.
That's the idea. And the source nodes contrast this inherited wealth really heavily with Los Angeles during the exact same time period.
Now, that's a great comparison.
Yeah. In the 1850s, Los Angeles was just a quiet, dusty, empty, relatively undeveloped piece of land.
Which, logically, is exactly what a brand new remote Western settlement should look like.
Right. And the theory argues that this stark contrast, the dusty, bare-bones reality of Los Angeles versus the sudden, impossible glass and steel grandeur of San Francisco, well, it proves they weren't built by the same wave of pioneer ingenuity.
They were simply discovered and dug out at different rates.
Exactly. It's a battle over who gets to define the land.
So really, this entire alternative narrative completely transforms the history of American westward expansion.
It changes everything.
It's no longer a story of creation or pioneer grit and taming the Wild West. It becomes a story of an archaeological cover-up.
The settlers just claimed the ruins of the West.
Every grand archway and cobblestone street is just a piece of a stolen legacy.
It is a sweeping, comprehensive alternative reality. It takes geography, history, and architecture and weaves them all into this single narrative of suppression.
We have gone on a pretty incredible journey today, just unpacking all of this.
We really have.
I mean, we started with the origin of the word California, the myth of Queen Calafia, her Amazonian warriors, and her island of gold.
And we saw how that myth influenced the 17th century cartographers who drew California as a massive floating island, totally separated from reality.
Right. And from that map, we explored the supposed mechanism of the cover-up, the Great Mud Flood of 1862.
A violent geological reset that buried the old world,
leaving those half-basement windows in your neighborhood as quiet, half-sunken witnesses to the cataclysm.
And finally, we unpacked the aftermath. This staggering logistical impossibility of San Francisco's early architecture.
Leading to the conclusion that historical revisionists like Scaliger and the Jesuits didn't build the modern world with pickaxes and horse carts.
They just dug it out of the dirt and took the credit.
Regardless of whether you view the lost world of Tartaria as a wild, unfounded internet conspiracy or as a genuinely intriguing thought experiment about the malleability of history, it does something undeniably powerful.
It forces you to look at the physical world, not just as a passive backdrop to your daily life, but as an active, potentially deceptive participant in history.
You really can't unhear this stuff. The next time you walk down the street in your city, you are going to look at those old, heavy stone buildings differently.
You'll look at those windows sitting right at ankle level and wonder, even just for a split second, what massive, buried grand halls might be sitting right beneath the pavement you're standing on.
It challenges us to question the history of our built environment, to not just accept the plaque on the wall.
Absolutely.
And that leaves us with a final lingering thread for you to pull on. Throughout this entire deep dive, we talked about the land.
Right, the physical evidence.
We talked about the floating maps, the physics of the mud, and the impossible architecture of these inherited cities. But if these massive, magnificent glass and steel palaces were already there, who actually lived in them?
The human element is the ultimate missing piece of the puzzle here.
Exactly. What did the culture of the Tartarian people actually look like? What was their art?
What did their faces look like before the mud swept them away into total obscurity?
The buildings survived, but the builders vanished without a trace. So the next time you look at the oldest, grandest building in your city, look past the date carved over the front door.
Look closely at the stones themselves.
And ask, whose hands originally laid them? Because maybe, just maybe, the world you think you know is just an island floating in the imagination of history.